Alrighty, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Cars Racing Show. I'm Kate Dillon from the Cars Racing Show and from CrateInsider.com. So I'm always very interested in what's going on with in the 525 world, and I'm really excited that we were able to bring in these two very intelligent engine builders who have been doing this for quite a while. I mean, you guys are the two go-tos in the whole industry when it comes to, if a person was going to ask about what to do with a 525, people are going to go to these two guys no matter where those racers are located in the country. So we're so fortunate to have them both here and giving us their knowledge. So I want to, first of all, thank you guys for being part of this. Welcome to the show. Welcome to this class. And be sure to ask any questions. Just a side note, I am recording this because I'd like to be able to deliver this information, whether this way you don't have to take notes. You can look back on it at another time. But what's going to be very valuable, if you have any questions, if we could either get you a microphone, or if one of you guys would please just repeat the question. So like what he said was such and such. Everybody in the room can hear it, but I can about guarantee you that the microphone, that the recording probably won't. So if you've ever seen one of those press conferences where they're clearly not using the right microphone, then you see how bad the quality is. So let's try to do that so we can really get the most value out of this even at a later time. So thanks you guys so much, and if you guys can talk to microphones, that'd be awesome.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Thank you for coming to attend this seminar. I'm Don Blackshear. My business is Race City Performance. I've been involved in the CT525 program for 12 years maybe now, something like that. Was fortunate enough to be involved in the redesign of the engine in 17 and 18 with General Motors. So we kind of know this thing inside and out, and it's kind of my wheelhouse, so to speak, of my business. And we kind of focus on 525 stuff. Today we're going to basically just give you an overview of the engine. A lot of you guys are new to the 525 world and LS platform type engines. The do's and don'ts. We're open to any questions, and we'll have the answers between Steve and myself of what you're going to be asking about. Today with me is Steve Hendren from Hendren Racing Engines. They've been in the crate industry for, how long was your dad, 30 years?
Oh gosh, I think we started doing crate motors, I'm not talking 525s, but crate engines 2004.
Yeah. So we can pretty much answer any questions, but the CT525 engine is based off the LS3 platform with General Motors. The engine's 376 cubic inches. It has a 4065 bore. The stroke on the crankshaft is 3.622, and the connecting rod length in it is 6.098. It has a powdered metal I-beam connecting rod in it with a bushed pin in, so it has a floating wrist pin in it. Is that you or me?
Me or, oh, it's my damn phone or what it is.
Now, when the engines were originally brought into production with GM, they were an assembly line based engine, and it had a hyper-eutectic piston in it. And as cars got better, things started happening, and there were some failures going on in it, and that's what pointed toward a redesign of the engine due to the application it was being used in. The engine is all factory GM parts except for a few components in it. The pistons are a Mala forged piston that was designed for this application. It has an ARP rod bolt that was designed for the cracked metal powdered rod.
And that was the two failure points.
Yep, that was the two failure points in the engine.
I was thinking, one of these two is like not jiving.
Okay, we'll share this one.
We'll share that one.
Okay. And then it also went with a oil pump upgrade because the original engine design didn't have sufficient.
Wow, this I'm trying to
turn it red. Yeah. Okay. We increased the oil flow through the engine because that was something that we found in the application to run the sustained RPM. We needed to have more oil control in the engine, so Melling did a pump that added us a little more volume to it. But outside of that, the engine is all factory GM except for the Champ oil pan that was designed for it. The engine makes peak horsepower at 6,800 RPM as an average. That can move up or down just a little bit depending on carburetors, fuel, header combinations in it. Peak torque numbers usually land in the 5,000 to 5,200 RPM range, again, depending on fuel, headers, things of that nature. The engine has a 55 millimeter camshaft in it. It has a 1:7 ratio rocker, and it uses the same valve spring as the GM Performance 604 engine does. It has very controlled valve motion in it, so we don't see the extensive valve spring wear that we've seen in the past with the Gen 1 type small blocks in a crate application. Non-adjustable rocker arms on it, so the valve train maintenance on it is basically zero. Your normal weekly maintenance on the engine is service the air filter, and on my engine packages is with the oil that we utilize, usually we're about 400 laps and we change oil in it. So most guys, it's 4 to 5 nights of racing usually and change oil in it. The one thing that's critical on these engines, the engine was designed as an emissions engine, the LS platform, so there's coolant restrictions in the head gasket into the cylinder head. So the steam line kits and stuff on these engines is real critical to keeping the cooling system efficient and keep it from aerating inside the cylinder head. There's several different versions of cooling steam line kits and cooling systems out there. I was fortunate enough with my relationship with C.J. Jones at Jones Racing Products that we worked on our version of it about 12, 13 years ago. That's been very successful with it, of basically getting the air out of the system. We also worked with Art Leonetti, the late Art Leonetti at Arch Radiators to develop the thermostat control system on it that's pretty much essential with an E85 based engine. We have customers that run gasoline, but probably 95% of my customer base is all on E85 fuel. And if you know anything about E85 fuel, it doesn't like cold engine temperatures. So the thermostat program that we have on there regulates the temperature and keeps it in that 185 to 195 degree range, which is pretty much optimum on E85. We're fortunate enough to have Nick Patterson in here from Stealth Carburetors, and Nick has a very extensive knowledge on E85 fuels, and I'm sure he's going to add some insight into this as we go through this little seminar. He's looking forward to it, actually. I kind of abused him at his seminar a little bit last year, so I'm kind of waiting to see what he throws at me. So just this engine builder type deal, we kind of pick on each other a little bit. The other thing with the LS platform, the oil pump is mounted on the crank snout. So the stuff we're recommending, I'm sure Steve does also, primer systems on the oil system. Because the thing will siphon feed everything back into the pan during the week, and sometimes it can take 30 to 40 seconds for the thing to get oil pressure. So I recommend priming the oil system on them one way or the other. The other thing with the crank-mounted oil pump in the front, you have to be real crucial about belt tension on the water pump, because you have a snout sticking out there that is gun drilled through the center. So any type of over-tightening of belts and stuff on these engines can deflect the clearances in the oil pump and cause issues for you down the road. So there's little things there that you just need to be aware of. Some of the systems out there offer belt tensioners on it, which are good ideas, but you just have to be very cautious about how you use them on these particular engines. It's coil-on plug ignition. It uses a crank sensor and a cam sensor to activate the ignition system. The cam sensor is strictly used for the initial start of the engine, and then it runs off the crank sensor from that point on. In my experience with it, I think I've changed 4 cam sensors in my entire time with it, but crank sensors are usually where there's an issue at if you have anything ignition related going on. It does have programmable ignition, and currently none of the sanctioning bodies have guidelines on timing maps or timing numbers or RPM limits. Personally, all my engines are limited at 7,500 RPM. Is where we run them, and timing maps basically will depend on the fuel that you're utilizing in the engine. Gasoline wants something different than the 85, and oxygenated gas wants something different. So you just kind of have to work on that with your engine builder or yourself, or one of us can help and assist with that. And it's a very basic system. It's not complicated to operate. As far as timing maps and changing things in it, just requires a laptop to do it, but it's a very simple program.
Pretty much plug and play, too.
Yeah, it's pretty much plug and play. I mean, the boxes come from MSD. We use a 6014 CT controller is what I recommend on using on them, and it has a map in it that'll start up and run, and you can chassis dyno with it, engine dyno, and then tune accordingly. The LS platform, there's a lot of guys out there in the street world, drag world, that live and down chassis dynos, tuning timing maps and fuel curves. And, if that's someone you have in your life that does that stuff, you just use it to your advantage, because it is a tool that you can use to affect the torque curve and the power curve of the engine. If I'm talking too fast through all this, raise your hand and stop, or if you've got any question about, we'll just write it down and we'll work on it from there. What else about it? You want to add something in there, boss?
I think you pretty much covered it.
I try to. Yeah, that way. Let's see what else about it. Oh, oil capacity on them. On our engines, usually it's 7.5 quarts total. With our line kit that you see here and our primer mounted on the front of the engine. Depending on oil line length, will determine your total volume. I have some guys that are 8.5 quarts that have the filters and the larger filters and stuff, but usually 7 to 7.5 quarts is sufficient. Oil level on these things, it does have a full windage tray that captures the crankshaft in it, so overfilling them with oil does create oil temperature in them. In my engines, we run basically the level plug on the right side of the oil pan, the oil level 1 inch down below the top of the nut. Seems to be pretty optimum and, you know, universal for most guys. The engine utilizes all metric hardware on it externally, so bell housing bolts, side motor mount bolts are all metric. I'm sure Steve offers bolt kits. We have bolt kits for them to bolt the accessories on them. The flywheel bolts do actually go into the crankcase of the engine, so you always have to make sure you put some type of sealer on them when you put them in. Otherwise, you'll have an oil leak coming around the threads of the bolt after a race or two. I've had guys do that, and I was like, didn't you read the paperwork? You know, because we stated in the paper to do that. Crankcase vent systems. We designed several different versions of it. We have a canister that mounts on the right front cylinder head that we did for the sprint car program at Knoxville, Iowa, that's still utilized out there today. And then with my engines, we use one breather on the left rear valve cover, works sufficient for us with it. And then the KRC system uses 2 breathers that tie the front and back of the left valve cover on with that. Carburetor spacer wise, there again, depends on your carburetor combination, but most guys are anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inch. Some guys are in between. But like I said, most of my guys are on E85 fuel. Nick has a really good straight leg booster carburetor that's an inch 345 Venturi that runs really well on them. The Willie stuff that we use equalizer carburetors with an inch 250 Venturi on stuff. And then Mike Hendren, Steve's brother, does the carburetors at Hendren, and they have different combinations depending on the fuel that you're utilizing. Only thing else I do, we do offer aluminum motor mounts for the side of the engine that we developed years and years ago. The block is factory cast aluminum block. It has windowed mains in it, and what I mean by windowed is you can physically stick your fingers between the main saddle and the bottom of the bore of the block. So it's a weak area in there. So we designed an aluminum motor mount for the engine so it would have a give point. Now, a lot of companies offer steel motor mounts for them, but with the cars, in my opinion, the cars being bump stopped up on the right front, all that torsional load's going in the side of the block. So in turn, that's pulling on cylinder walls and side of the block. So I always run aluminum motor mounts on my stuff just to give it an absorption area of the engine. What else here? I think that's about covered about all of it. You want to add something to any of that?
I can't think of anything at the moment. Well, if you go by my brother and son's booth, it's A&M booth over there. They've actually got some vents that we've developed as well for the 525, and they actually just screw on either end directly. It's all 3D printed stuff.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah. Now, the engines come from GM from February of 2019 to current was when the redesign of the engine was done with the forged piston and the component upgrades in it. Now, engines that were prior to March of 19 all have a blue GM cap seal that are on the engine. If you're looking at buying a used CT525, those cap seals, I could take all of them off and hand them to you in less than 5 minutes, put them back on, and you'll never even knew they've been off the engine. So be very leery of buying an engine that has cap seals on it. Now, from that point on, it went to an encryption type seal similar to the 604. We have the timing cover, oil pan, and intake manifolds have the encryption seals on them. There's actually 27 encryption points in that seal, and I have a scanner that can pick that up. So if any of you guys are buying used engines, because there's quite a few used engines floating around and have anything in question, then we're able to scan that seal. If you email me a photo of that seal, I can scan it and kind of make sure that that is the correct seal for that engine. Now, the unique thing with the 525, the seals are so small, even if someone tried to get them apart, they're going to destroy them. I mean, it doesn't give you much room to work with, but if you're out there looking for a used engine, just be very cautious of that. The new engines also have an ID tag on the right-hand side right in front of the crank sensor that has a serial number on it and a build date, and then they also have a QR-coded white tag that's behind the left cylinder head. All of those numbers that if you get a hold of me, and I'm sure Steve can do the same thing, we can give you the true information on that engine just to make sure it's not, been tampered with, so to speak, as far as from the sealing side of it. The engines that leave my shop, we do an engine referred to as a DC-18. It's a 525 that I developed for dirt car UMP modifieds back in 2018. That's how that name kind of came about for dirt car. It's the only approved engine if you use a 525 in dirt car UMP, and it has our encrypted seal program, which has the ability to scan it to get to the database on. All of my engines leave our shop with those seals on it, so the engine can be utilized in a UMP modified or a limited late model. Now, in the limited late model world, in the past several years, we've pretty much gotten all the sanctioning bodies and all of the tracks that allow the 525 as an option on the programs that we utilize as far as the sealing and rules guidelines for these engines. The last tracks that just came on board, we have Potomac Speedway came on board, Hagerstown came on board, Winchester came on board. Winchester was on last year. Steel Block Bandits allow the engines with factory seals or their series seals or our dirt car seals, which would be DC-18. Blue Ridge Outlaw late models allow it, and pretty much any sanctioned body in the country that runs 525s allows the sealing programs that we have set up for this engine. There's authorized repair centers for them, just as they have for the 602, 604 crate engines. And most of the series, Blue Ridge, I think there's five of us on that. And then there's, in the dirt car side of things, I have 4 shops, myself, and 3 shops out in the Midwest, because that's where the majority of those engines are utilized at, that do repairs on them. What else can we touch on it? Well, let's open up for some questions. Yes, the conversion that has the other seals, and those engines also have the hyper-eutectic piston, and they have the torque to yield rod bolt in them, and they have an oil pump in them that's 10% less flow volume than what this engine has. Those engines can be retrofitted. Blue Ridge Outlaw late model, Steel Block Bandits, and our dirt car program, we have aftermarket service parts for them where we have an aftermarket piston, an aftermarket connecting rod available, and then the oil pump option is also available with it. But the rest of the components in the engine must stay as factory GM. We learned so much over the years with the 604, 602 program. When this thing got introduced with an aluminum engine block, and this engine block, particular block, the sleeves are actually cast in the block when the block is cast. So you've got core shift that goes on with it. I mean, you pull the cylinder heads off of one of these things, and the cylinder wall thickness might be 150 on one side and might be 50 on the other. So there's a lot of things that move around. So in the beginning, when I was laying the program out for dirt car, because we were really the first ones that kind of had that structured type program. I mean, the Fuel Series did a repair program too with Steve and Jim Norman at City Chevrolet. But we gave an oversize on the piston because we knew the bore size was going to move around in this engine. So you're allowed to go up to 10 over on the bore size. And we do have a service piston that's a direct replacement for it, that you don't have to rebalance the assembly if you keep the factory connecting rod. And then we also offer an aftermarket connecting rod option for it during a repair process on the engine. But that's just something we looked at in the beginning because we knew what we had learned with 602, 604 stuff being trapped in that window to try to add more life to the engine for the end consumer. Where when the 602, 604 engines, once you get to 8 thousandths over on the bore size and there's no service piston available, you're kind of stuck. And we just kind of wanted this program to be able to have, more durability for the end consumer. On cylinder head stuff on it, this engine, everything is as cast. There's no rotary tool marks anywhere in it, so it's real easy to tech as far as bore scoping and looking at things. There is a GM technical manual. My partners in all this, Newsom Raceway Parts and Raceway Chevrolet, that work with me with the GM side of things with all the series and stuff I'm involved with. We've got some technical manuals up here that you guys are more than welcome to take. And we combined all three engines in one technical manual. So there's the 602 guidelines, the 604 guidelines, and the CT525 guidelines. And you're more than welcome to take one of these at the end of the show just to have in your toolbox or restroom reading material or whatever you want to do with it. So, but
smartphones are for 'em.
yeah, I know. I don't know. I'm old school. I like reading it in print. So that thing's too easy to manipulate stuff. So, but yeah, it's you're more than welcome to have some of those, and it gives you all the specs on it. It also gives part numbers of the components, and all the components are very readily available through your GM Performance dealer. Because even the aftermarket parts that are in this engine all have GM factory part numbers on them. So it's real easy. Now this piston, or the piston that's in this engine, when I talk about the tech side of things, is it has no valve reliefs in the piston. It's perfectly flat. So if you're a tech official or part of tech side of things, it's real easy bore scope to look in to see if anything's been manipulated in a factory sealed engine. Now, the aftermarket piston options do have a valve relief in them, but if it's a factory sealed engine, it has a true flat top in it with no valve relief. The intake valves that are in these engines are hollow stem valves, and the valve weight and stuff on it is very lightweight in this, and that way we can get away with the light valve spring and still have the ability to turn 7,500 RPM without any problem. Yeah, and it's a 5/16 stem also. So any more questions? I see a lot of people in here that I know don't race 525s. And they're new to this, so I want to hear questions. Well, here's the thing with the alternator. Some people recommend it, some people don't. In our testing that we've done, the ignition system consumes 7 amps at 7,500 RPM. When you look at the wiring harness on this thing, you've got a little 24-gauge wire that runs the whole system. So personally, if you have a 16-volt battery, you're fine with it. If you're running a 12-volt system in your car, then I would recommend an alternator. But if you're on a 16-volt battery, I personally don't recommend one unless you are forgetful at charging your battery. Now, the MSD ignition controller does have a maximum voltage number, and it will put a code in the box if it exceeds 18 volts. Okay, it won't affect the performance of the box as far as the performance of the engine, but over a period of time, the circuit boards and stuff in it aren't designed to handle that type of excessive voltage. At one of the races at the end of the year down at Livonia, customer of some other shop was there first time running his 525, and he said it ran fine for the first 5 laps, and then at high RPM it started running a misfire program. It just started popping and banging at high RPM. So I said, okay. I said, well, here, I'll help you because I'll help anybody. If you got a 525, I'll help you. I'm not one of those guys. So plugged the laptop into it, and I said, okay, start it up. And I noticed it had an alternator on it. Started up sitting there and idling, and it had 24 volts going to the ignition system. And I said, okay. I said, I think I see where the problem's at. And I said, hopefully it hasn't damaged the box. So I said, just take the belt off the alternator and race it. So he did, and it fixed the problem. So the alternators that if a customer asks for an alternator with his, then the alternators we use from Jones have an adjustable regulator in them, and I back it down to where the alternator will never exceed 17 volts, just to keep the battery fresh, so to speak. But there again, it's your choice. Now, Steve might have a different opinion on that because I see alternators on every one of his engines in tech. So
we do run alternators on all of our stuff. But yeah, I mean, your point there was dead nuts right. So yeah, you got to be really careful with the voltage output.
Next.
Do you have is there a typical lap range you got like on rebuild, or is there a lead down on them?
When on the hyper-eutectic piston engines, most of the guys were on, say, a 30-race rebuild type cycle because the piston was, a softer type piston. It wasn't designed to handle the load. when we did the redesign on the engine, the piston ring package and the piston that's in this thing is pretty overkill for it. The ring pack that's in this is out of the LT4 GM supercharged LS version engine. So most of my guys are usually on a 60 to 80 race rebuild cycle. Personally, I recommend valve springs every 30 nights with it. And the reason why we can do that is due to the valve motion is so controlled in this engine due to the large base circle camshaft, the high ratio rocker arm. We have a taller installed height than what a normal 604 might have. So our spring rate's down a little bit, but it's just a lot more controlled motion. When we did some of the redesign stuff, we did a lot of spintron testing on it to see where we could get away with valve train, and we ran a 5,000 mile simulation cycle with using 7,500 as our maximum RPM number. And when we rated the springs before we started the simulation, and when we got done, we had 3 springs that had lost 4% of their tension. So that kind of told me that it's kind of don't have a problem with it, with running that kind of RPM with it. Now, Steve and them might have a different idea with it, but that's what I've seen in my world. And usually anything with a rebuild comes down to you and your maintenance program. If you service your air filter nightly and keep the air inlet going in, the air going in this engine clean, it'll add life to the engine. Most guys are overkill on oil changes, in my opinion, with a lot of this stuff. You know, some guys I have change it every night. It's like, well, if you pull the plug out and you can see your finger through the oil, put the plug right back in it, because you're not gaining anything by changing the oil. Of course, dusty conditions can change things differently if you race in dusty conditions. But normally on my guys, I tell them 60 to 80 races. I have guys that have 4 and 5 years on their engines, and all we've done is put valve springs on them. I use the Knoxville Pro Sprint program as kind of a poster child for it. At Knoxville, you run around that place wide open, and you don't lift off the throttle. And it'll take the engine from 7,200 at the end of the straightaway and pull it down to 5,200 in the middle of the corner with the throttle wide open, and then accelerate back up. It's about the most brutal place on engines because you don't lift. And there's guys, actually the guy that won the championship out there, Mike Mayberry, last year, is one of our engines that was from 2017. And it's never been into except for putting valve springs on it. So it's kind of an overkill with the ring pack. Steve and them, you know, Steve's done a lot of the stuff that side of the country and down in South in Georgia and stuff, and maybe he's seen more, but that's what I've seen in my stuff. But I control RPM, and I'm pretty hard on people with timing maps, and because people can get carried away with timing maps in these engines. The cylinder head in this engine is very efficient, and it doesn't require a lot of ignition timing to make power. Where conventional small block stuff, you know, guys run 36, 38, 40 degrees, depending on the carburetor size and airflow going through the engine. But this thing, you don't dare want to get in them numbers, or at least in my combinations, you don't. I try to educate people, you know, the timing number is real critical at maximum volumetric efficiency around that peak torque number, and that's where you have to be real critical with it. Because if you get too much timing in these things, it'll detonate itself to death at that point. So, but you can be creative. I mean, that's the laptop. That's one of the unique things I like about the program is the ability to change the torque curve of the engine, you know, with the timing map. Some guys lock a map in and they don't mess with it. My deal's different. I move it around because it's a tuning tool to me. You know, the series don't have any guidelines on it. Originally, when the program started years ago with Tim Sims and Crate Racing USA stuff, they had a spec timing map and kept everybody locked in it. And the Wausoda program up north that I do a lot of engines for up there, we have a spec timing map in Wausoda. And the 6014 actually has a pigtail on it where you plug a tech box into it, and it'll come up green or red. If it comes up green, the RPM, the timing map, and the coil usage are all in parameter. If it comes up red, it'll tell you which parameter's out of spec. And we use a lot of that in the Wausoda program, and then my 525 two-barrel program that runs in Southern Ohio with Atomic Speedway and the tracks up there with the Sport Mod version. So that's that. You want to add to that? I'm sure you do.
I mean, just back to the rebuild question. I mean, I always advise my guys, you know, buy a leak down tester and, you know, leak these things down every 15, 20 shows. I'm referring to the 525, 604s, 602s. I recommend that more often. But on that, you know, every 15, 20 shows, just leak it down. give yourself peace of mind, and then you know if it's getting taken care of properly and everything's in good shape. And, at that point, if there's a question, then just contact your engine builder and talk to him about it.
Yes, that's usually an average number. Normally, here's the thing that I want to get into that. This engine has no top dead center marker on the timing cover. So most of the guys that call and say, I want to leak the engine down. I'm like, okay. I index every 90 degrees on my dampeners when the engine leaves the shop, and I have a fixture that I use to check some things. But with no TDC pointer, sometimes it can get a little aggravating trying to find true top dead center in them. So I use my guys, I said, just use cranking compression gauge to get yourself an idea. When they get the engine from me, I tell them race it 2 nights, check cranking compression on it, see where it's at, and then just start logging that data. And I tell them basically every time that you want to change oil in the engine, just check cranking compression and see where it's at. That's how I kind of do it, because trying to find true top dead center sometimes can get really tough on these things when you're in the car trying to work on it, that way. So cranking compression numbers, usually if you're 190 PSI and up, I do 5 revolutions as an average, but your engine, just start a database on it. Your mom's telling you about it. Miss Betty Hendren back there in the back. Everybody's his mom and all her grandmas. So super nice lady. But I just have my guys just try to keep a record of it using cranking compression as a number, because it's kind of a lot simpler to do. But either way, leak it down, as Steve said, cranking compression number. And trust me, if there's something going sideways in it, it'll tattletale on it real quick with these things. But like I said, with the ring pack that's in this engine, we don't see a lot of wear in that area at the moment. Now, you can create that wear with having carburetor situation that's not tuned properly, which Nick over here, we can probably get some insight into him from what he's seen, because, Tony at Stealth has done carburetors forever. Nick worked for Tony, and now Nick and his wife Samantha Patterson, they own Stealth carburetors. And Nick, you want to put some insight into wear in engines with fuel?
Oh, I would say maintenance on your carburetor is pretty big that you don't think about, especially on the 85. It's already sounds pretty radical, and you blow a power valve, and then you're cruising around the pits where they're just loading up the cylinders and washing the oil down. That prematurely wears the engine out. So maybe every once in a while check carburetor at least once a year there. If it backfires, so the old ones were really bad when you turn the key on about blowing back through the carburetor, and that killed power valves like right off the bat. So I don't know if those newer ones, are they better than that?
We have, and personally, I haven't seen any issues with it backfiring. Usually, my customers, if someone calls and said it wants to pop when it goes to start, usually there's something going wrong with the cam sensor type situation, because that's what indexes it to tell it where the cam timing's at to start it. And then other guys, there again, everybody starts their cars differently. Some guys flip the ignition on, then hit the starter button. I was taught by my dad years ago that spin the thing over, get it rolling over. As soon as you see the oil pressure gauge move, then flip the ignition on. So, everybody starts their cars differently.
That's how I always recommend, like, get it spinning, turn the
Right.
ignition on. That way you can't backfire
Right.
the carburetor.
Exactly.
Always save your power valves. And
Yep.
What about oil cooler on that thing?
Well, when the engine originally was designed, again, it was a production engine, and a lot of the issues that GM had with it at the time was basically from lack of education to the end consumer. You go walk in that room out there in the trade show, and everybody that walks by, you say, what weight oil do you run in your engine? Well, they're all either 1550 or 1040 or 2050. Well, when you have an engine that's a production line engine that was designed for a 020 or 030 weight oil, and you put that oil in it, now you've got oil flow issues. And that was what was creating a lot of the problem. Now, the build structure that we did when we did the redesign, clearances are opened up, and most everybody is either on a 1040 or 1550 type version fuel. Personally, on our engines, I tell the customer, if you're going to run 100-lap races with it and be on gas, definitely run an oil cooler. But on the E85 version engines, we don't run oil coolers on them. So that's how, in my program. Now, Steve, that might be different, so I'll let
We don't run coolers.
run coolers either. Yeah. So, Now, you know, these things have no provision on them for a spin-on type oil filter, so you have to run a remote oil filter mount. Everybody used to have them on the chassis, plumb them up, prime them, and go. I had a customer early last year was like, "Hey, can you help me out a little bit?" And I said, "What's up?" And he says, "Well, switching from my 602 to my 604 to my 525, got to unhook oil lines. And of course, you always make a mess on the floor, no matter how good you are at capping stuff off." So I said, "Sure." So we came up with that head mount version that works in pretty much every chassis that's in production. Have an oil line kit for it, and that way it stays contained. And he's got it down now. It takes him 30 minutes by himself to swap engines from 604 to 525. So, but I personally don't recommend oil cooler unless you're running 100-lap races. And most of our 100-lap races now, I think Steel Block Bandits are the only ones that do them. And because 80% of the field's on E85, there's usually a fuel stop at lap 50 to 60. So we really don't see oil temperature issues in them now. I don't know. What do you guys recommend for oil weight in your program stuff?
Well, it depends on what a guy wants to spend on oil, honestly. Me personally, with the testing we've done, the best oil I've found is the Daytona 1, and we use that 540 in ours.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Curiosity, I know that one of the guys who won the Carolina Clash Race, CT525.
Yes. Yep.
How often does that happen? And another question is when they're going to tactical.
Right. The Carolina Clash event down at Sumter Speedway, that car was a Blue Ridge Outlaw car that Banjo was driving that Gerald Mint's family owns, him and his boys have. And 525s are allowed to run with super late models in most sanctioning bodies. Some don't allow them to run due to the coil on plug ignition. And that was some of the problems with that down there. The tech officials really didn't understand exactly what was going on because in their mind mentally they never thought one could win. But track conditions play a lot into that. Tyler Baer is one of my customers, and he won quite a few super races this year with his 525. And has been very successful with it, especially on the shorter tracks. I mean, it's just the tracks are hard, slick, and you got 900 horsepower, and you got something that makes less than 600, and you're just out driving. The tech side of it, there again, gets back into education. Their series director, and they probably called you too. I think they called about all of us, and I spent hours on the phone with them explaining, like, here's how you tech it. And I'm very fortunate. I manage the SEAL programs and the crate engine programs for the World Racing Group. So we've got crate programs all over the country, and I manage 27 engine shops with their repair side of things. So we see pretty much everything. So I'm all about dumbing things down to make it to where common people that aren't engine people truly, but they might be chassis people or whatnot that are tech officials, so they can tech the engines. This engine is very easy to tech once you understand how to tech it. And I think in the Carolina Clash program, they won't have that problem in the future because we've kind of educated them on everything. And I believe, to my knowledge, they're still going to allow it to compete in there. The only thing that I believe they have done, which don't quote me on this, but they have required them to have a flat timing curve so that the engine has the same ignition timing at 3,000 RPM as it does at 7,500. So, any other questions? Come on, Rogers boys back there.
What about adjusting with a computer? Is that something?
Yep. All the engines, and I don't know if Steve and them do this or not, but when you buy the engine from me, I provide a thumb drive and a USB cable, and I'm sure they do too because it comes with a controller from MSD. And timing maps, there again, are all based off fuel consumption and fuel curves. We all have generic maps that we put in them that'll pretty much run on anything. Gas, E85, but then there's maps that we work on to where it accelerates harder. We all know in the crate world, whether it's 602, 604, or 525, the faster you can get to peak RPM, the faster you usually are on the racetrack. So we all work on acceleration rates of the engines. And a lot of that's done with carburetors, booster design, venturis, headers, anything. I tell people all the time, we're trapped in a box with this engine. We can't manipulate anything in it. And the unique thing, there's a lot of, when we did the redesign, that you can tell if something's been modified just with your eye, because there's clearances in this engine that you look at visually. If you go to alter, say, rocker arm ratio in it, you can't do it unless you grind on a part to make it work. So there's a lot of little things like that. But the timing map, there again, to me personally, the most critical point is when the thing's at peak torque, because that's when the volumetric efficiency is at its highest, and that's when it's prone to detonate. And if you don't have the fuel curve happy through that point, then you're going to end up with problems. Nick has a really good out-of-the-box setup that he has, that him and Tony had worked on over the years, that's pretty much a bolt-on, just the idle speed, go race it, and it's really good. Mike Hendren, Steve's brother that does the carburetor, he has the same platform. Bolt it on, just idle speed, and you're good to go. Now, our program, I use Willys, I use Stealth. The difference in everybody asks, well, why do you use different carburetors? I try to look at my relationship with the customer a little different than some people do. When you get on our program, it gives you 24/7 access to me. People tell me I'm nuts for doing it, but I've done it. I'm 60 years old and I've done it my whole life. Figure if you're spending money with me, you ought to have the ability to get contact with me. But on our Willys program stuff, we use external jet adjustments. That makes way it's simpler, and most all of my guys are on Super Bowl programs, so there's a lot more components on the carburetor. Where with the Stealth version carburetor, you either do air bleed adjustments or physically have to remove float bolts off and change jets and put it back together. Performance-wise, we've got them balanced to where they're identical. You couldn't tell which one runs which, but some guys have relationships with Stealth, do their 604 program and love them, and some guys have stuff with Willys. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. But the timing map is, I look at it this way: at peak torque, if you flirt over 32 degrees, you're going to be looking for trouble. And above that or below that, that comes into carburetor tuning. I won't divulge my recipe, and I'm sure Steve won't divulge his. My whole life, my daddy taught me, he said, always look at the scoreboard because that tells the whole story. You know, who's standing in victory lane, who's sitting on the pole, what they're using. And that's what drives this business, to be honest with you, because I tell everybody all the time, we're all selling the same bag of potato chips. It all depends on what you do with that bag of potato chips. Outside of it is how you gain the performance. So, and that's what drives us. And, you know, my whole life, I mean, I grew up around drag racing, raced NHRA professionally, won championships, and was always driven, you know, win, do everything you can do, you know. And it's like you have to tune and be creative. And when I look at things, everybody's like, well, you built open engines for years, why don't you do that? Well, for one, most working people can't afford the built motor version today. And that's what made the crate program so lucrative for the racer and for the engine builder, is it comes in a box. So now we work on how can we make that box better. So that's when carburetor technology with Tony originally, and now Nick. I mean, Nick and I have talked here at the show, and there's things he's doing that I'm like, man, I thought I was thinking out there, but he's thinking out there with things that he's working on and seeing results. Mike, I talk to Mike at the races all the time because this knucklehead only shows up when his kid shows up to race. But Mike's working on stuff all the time. And as you can see at the A&M deal they have over there with Alex and Mike, they're working on things outside the box. So it comes down to just, you know, it's about relationships. Your engine builder, work with them, and you have a relationship with them, and just work with them and use their knowledge, because we've all got drastic knowledge from doing this stuff.
It's like, you know, and it goes back to stuff like us working with Profab and developing the anaeroversion mufflers, stuff like that. These engines nowadays, I don't care, 602, 604, 525, touching on a point you made earlier, it's all about torque. I honestly don't care what these things make for horsepower, top end. To me, it doesn't matter. Everything we want to do is low end torque, low to mid range. And that's what we concentrate on, and that's what we try to go for from now on. And that's where we're doing some of that thinking out of the box, and that's some of their products that they're developing is directly designed to influence that.
Did that answer your question, sir? I'll get you close to the recipe, but I'm not going to give it to you unless you sign the front of the check. So, And that's, I mean, there again, you know, Steve works with his customers, and you build that relationship. And they test, they have in-house chassis dyno, and they're constantly on it running stuff. My situation with my dyno situation, being in NASCAR land in Mooresville, we have access to dynos that normal engine shops don't have access to. So we chassis dyno and we engine dyno, but we have the ability to have race air, which we can control the atmosphere that the engine's running in. And that's what I do all my validations on my engines in the dyno with race air. And I told a gentleman in there yesterday, I said, if you could pull the computer from the dyno here, I could pull up 100 runs, and there might be 1/8 of an inch between the highest one and the lowest one on the dyno, on these engines, on the hand-built versions. There's all kind of horror stories on the 602, 604 stuff of having components installed incorrectly or components missing in them. You know, these things are hand-built for GM. There's a controlled group of builders that build them. They build them in small run build cycles. It was at 25 at a time. So it's a very controlled built engine. It's more like a hand-built race engine because that's exactly what it is. And since it's went to that program, we really don't see issues with them. You might have one every now and then that you'll have crazy happen, but 9 times out of 10, when I have someone call me with a question that they've had a 525 failure, the first thing I asked them was, send me a picture of how the oil lines are on the engine, because they're so easy to flip them. And if you flip them, now it restricts the oil flow through the engine, and it'll basically make it anywhere from 6 to 8 laps, and the connecting rod's coming out of it. There's just no way around it. So, and I'm sure you guys do it, but all our stuff's stamped, so you can't mess it up. But there again, we're all accessible over the phone. So if you have questions, just call, email. I mean, we're both people that are open.
I'd rather have you call.
Really?
Yeah, I type like this.
So, but yeah, just call or email, and we can answer your questions. Anybody got any other questions?
Do you guys recommend a header with your programs?
Yes. We're both profabs.
Yeah.
Yep. I do have customers, due to financial situations that use BA or use show and field. But my experience in our stuff with chassis dynoing, the profab header design, which he worked on initially, with the anti-revision muffler and the primary tube links and stuff, they did all the development in their shop. But the profab program, on what we see, it will usually carry the torque curve around 600 RPM further before it starts to roll over. So, but there again, you look at price points, you know, because there again, you got mild steel headers that, you know, say are $1,000 from BA, or show and fills are a little less than that. Mm-hmm. And profab is stainless only. And they're $2,500 a set. I look at it as an investment because the stainless header from profab will be with you for years to come. The mild steel tube header, you're going to be welding on it. After the one brand, you'll weld on it after the 3rd or 4th race. Yeah. The other brand, you might get the year out of it before you're going to be welding on it. So, plus the stainless looks a heck of a lot nicer. Yeah. So,
and they can pretty them back up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Andrew today told me it's $350 to have them repolished again. So they'll retumble them. But in their hand, I mean, there's so much engineering at Profab. They have in-house engineering staff that specialize in gas speed analysis. They do IndyCar, they do NASCAR. So we're fortunate to be we're very fortunate to be associated with that company, with Steve and Andrew and Dennis, their new guy that's out in the field learning this stuff. But we get access to that technology and we move it over into this. We've got some collector stuff we've been working on. We've had really good success with it. We'll be rolling out here shortly from Profab. It's a little different thought process. And how it got started for me personally was when the world-renowned Kevin Rumley decided he wanted to put a twisted motor deal in a late model, and it moved the header location and it created a problem for us. So we had to come up with a different design. So Andrew and I sat down at the shop one night on a napkin and drew out what we thought would work, and lo and behold, it worked. So they're working on producing those now, but that'll be something available in the future. But Profab for both of us is the benchmark for headers.
Do they
On the 525, they have the spec header for it. We offer it different. We have like the rocket program. Mark wants everybody on the inboard right side header. And then everything else is pretty much over rail type headers. But it's the same tube steps, links, things of that nature, because the chassis dyno, and they've done, and Andrew has talked with myself and Steve about it, they haven't visited that primary tube length and design since you guys did develop it. And we've learned so much with these engines, with carburetors, from people like Nick and Willie and Mike Hendren, and fuels and tuning, and we've enhanced the performance of the engine. And now I think we're to the point when we did the collector program and it made the change that we thought it would do. Now we're going to revisit the primary side of things, but that'll be later on in the year, I think, before that, because they've got the Honda IndyCar program that they're doing that's kind of keeping us fingers crossed we can keep product for the dirt world going here during this time, but that's where we're at. But headers is profab for both of us. Anything else from anybody? I see a lot of head shaking out there, so either you're drinking our Kool-Aid or you're trying to conjure up a question for us. Nick, have you got anything you want to come in?
And I think the biggest intimidating thing about that engine is everyone thinks that box has something special on it.
Right.
There's no distributor in there because no one has to set the distributor. It's actually easier to plug that in, to plug in the cord and
Right.
fire it up, because you can't get the distributor in there wrong. No one has to magically hold that timing light on.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Everyone reads that a little differently.
Right. Yep.
This is just right when you plug it in and fire it up.
Right, exactly. There's, on the 6014 CT box, the new version, when I spent a 2-year tender at Robert Yates Racing Engines developing a CT525 for NASCAR with the staff there at Robert Yates Racing Engines for the Pinty series for NASCAR. And these things have no provision for a mechanical pushrod type fuel pump on them. So we had to develop an electric fuel pump. So the first thing when we started the testing for it, we went the conventional way that everybody's used forever, is oil pressure sensor. Well, the way the oil system works in this, it was taking too long for it to bleed down to get to the pressure to shut the pump off. So working with Graham and the engineers at MSD, we now can activate the fuel pump off the crank sensor. So when you get your new 6014 CT box, most of them have a orange label on the end that has an N. That's the new version, and there's a 4th wire in there that is for actuating an electric fuel pump. So the wiring harness on this, you have a power wire that goes to your ignition switch, you have a ground wire, and you have a tach impulse wire, and the 4th wire is to activate the ground circuitry on the fuel pump. And that's what that's for. So most of my guys, I ask them, do you want me to tie it up or you want me to take it out of the harness, because it's real simple to do. My 525 program at Atomic Speedway with the 2-barrel, because it's a cost containment type engine package, we utilize an electric fuel pump that's mounted back. It has a spot it has to go on the car, and it has a spec fuel pump that has to run on it to run an electric fuel pump. And it's a 2-barrel carburetor version, so it has a $150 fuel pump that runs the system. But we did it for safety with NASCAR, and now we've implemented that over into the dirt world, because as soon as it loses crank signal, it just shuts the pump right off. And it does give you a 5-second pulse when you turn the ignition on, just to prime the system. And then as soon as it sees crank signal, it turns the electric fuel pump will run continuously. And as soon as it loses it, then it shuts the pump off. Most of the dirt sanctioned bodies don't allow electric fuel pumps because of the safety side of it. But in this version, I mean, I've already presented it to Dirt Car World Racing Group. If they decide to go this way in some point, then we already have that in play based off the NASCAR stuff that we've done for that side of it. Fuel pumps on it. There again, it gets down to whether you're running a float bowl carburetor or whether you're running a Super Bowl carburetor. Volume, the Super Bowl carburetor runs way more volume through it, returning back to the tank. So it takes a larger gear set pump to run it, versus when you run a float bowl carburetor, you can run a lower gallon per minute flow pump. Like 604 pumps are usually 250, 2.5 gallon minute pumps. Is that what you guys usually use on? Yeah, roughly that. Where a supermotor or alcohol engine or something that has large fuel demand, or the Super Bowl version, usually we're a 3.5 gallon a minute pump to a 4 gallon a minute pump is what works the best on those. Super Bowls. A lot of people have success with them. A lot of people struggle with them. And most of the time, the issue is either fuel pump size or return system size. The thing moves a lot of volume back to the tank because there's no fuel pressure regulator on it. It runs straight off the fuel pump.
Fuel cell venting too.
Yep, fuel cell venting. And that all gets back to the return as fluids coming out, fluids going in. There's got to be an air ability to move. Willie offers a billet screw-on cap with a built-in vent that works really well. Return lines, a minimum of a number 8. Most of my guys, we have them on 10s just to not have issues. Smooth bore hose, push lock, works just fine with them. But those things will run, if the 400 pump, you're 65 to 70 PSI, you'll see at wide open throttle. It's what you're seeing, yeah, depending on needles and seats if you got that, or the Super Bowl with none of it. So I know Mike's stuff, Mike loves the float style carburetors. And I've tried to tell him numerous times, I said, well, here, he said, no, I've already visited that and don't want to mess with it. So, and the thing is, Super Bowl to float style carburetor, there's no power gain in it as far as on the dyno, as far as torque numbers or power numbers. The biggest gain that I've seen with our stuff in the Super Bowl is when the car changes directions. With the Super Bowl version carburetor, the cavity that's in the float bowl keeps the fluid pressure, which the fluid would be the fuel, constant on the power valve channels and the main jet channels in the carburetor, so it doesn't see rich or lean as the fluid pressure moves from one side of the float bowl to the other. We did some testing in the summer with a customer that had 2 cars, and he wanted float bowl on one, non-float, and the Super Bowl on the other. And the first thing we know, as soon as the car turned into the corner, the thing would have a little bit of a tone change in the exhaust. It would get heavy or get kind of raggedy sounding, and then the Super Bowl carburetor would just sing through the corner. So we started manipulating with needles and seat size, float heights, and things like that, and got the float carburetor really close. But in our situation, we never could get it as good as the Super Bowl. Now on the engine dyno, it made the same power. So when it gets to the carburetors with floats, a lot of that comes down to you guys of how you run your race car. Some guys, the attitude of the car, how hiked up it is, how bump stopped it is, how hard it is on it, all affects that float needle and seat style carburetor. Is that what you see with it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, similar stuff. I mean, Willie's a good friend of mine. God, I've known him for freaking 20-something years. But he, it's a brilliant design, honestly. And I've seen the main benefit of using that system if you're on really very rough racetracks. And that's where I think by far and away it's something that, is a must run, especially if you're running super late model stuff. The 525 stuff, I haven't really seen it be 100% necessary. 604, 602, that's more economy based anyway, so guys are better off saving their money at that level. 525, I absolutely see a reason for it. And it may be something we revisit in the future.
Nick, you want to put some input into that since you live and die by carburetors every day?
I recommend now on rough racetracks and slow and slick racetracks, you already have the car at attitude.
Yep.
And no matter what I do to that carburetor, you're not going to fix fuel slosh in that bowl.
No.
You're in the race cars, you can feel the G-force. The fuel's going to do the same thing. The Super Bowl doesn't have that force.
Right.
And that shows up a lot on slick track stuff.
Right.
You wouldn't think slick track
Yeah.
stuff, because it's slower. The car's already at attitude with the right front down.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Right.
But yeah, if you were traveling, you go to too many different racetracks, Super Bowl eliminates all those problems that you wouldn't be able to work on other parts of the race car if you're messing with that carburetor.
Right. Yep. Yep. And that's kind of the same thing we've seen. And, with the Super Bowl program, you can discard the fuel pressure regulator. You don't have to worry about keeping up with that. There again, different carburetor manufacturers require different fuel pressures for their needle and seat combination, their float weights. There's so many variables. And there again, everybody has their own recipe. So there again, it gets back to that whole relationship thing of working with your engine builder and to gain the success that you're looking for.
Well, the cool thing is when you're working with your engine builder and develop that relationship, if shit goes wrong, you know who to call and say, hey, you screwed it up or you gave me the wrong advice or whatever, and either get corrected or get told, oh, yeah, you're right, sorry.
Any Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Speaking of that, what are we changing yet? I don't think anymore.
Most of the carburetor stuff, especially on the 85, we run such a large volume of fuel through them. You know, a little bit so you kind of understand mechanically with it, with the ethanol-based or methanol fuel. The reason you see performance gains in those engines over gasoline is due to the volume of fuel going through the engine. You're increasing the static compression of the engine with that. And it's the E85 version with stuff, we run so much more volume through it. And like on our stuff, people ask me all the time, and I try to work with numbers all the time because numbers won't lie to you. It's kind of like a Stanley tape measure. It's going to tell you the number. You know, it's not, there's no keyboard being pushed or anything. But when we run the numbers with it, usually like going from gas to E85, we usually see about a 22% increase in fuel consumption. And so the guys that are real serious about racing, that are trying to be the upfront every time they unload out of the deal, they monitor everything with that race car because that balance moves around in the car. That's one of the first things I tell guys when they ask me about, well, fuel. And I say, well, if you're used to running gas, you know, and then you go to E85, your rear weight percentage is going to change throughout the night, you know, as you're running the feature. So if your car is real super sensitive to, you know, rear weight percentage, you know, and you're on wanting to go to methanol or E85, you need to learn how to make your race car last longer and run better before it starts going away. So, you want your mic and working now?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
There you go.
All right. Hey, wow. All right.
So,
One less, is there a temperature you want to race it at?
on E85, I don't like anything below 180 degrees.
We agree on that 100%. That's what
Yep.
that's for.
Yep. That temperature regulator will usually keep it in the 185 to 195 degree range. Now, maximum temperature number on these things, usually that 220 number is where you start seeing power start to fall off. So you can run between 180 to 220. Fan blade situation on these things, there again depends on how sealed up you run the nose, the quality of radiator. There's so many aluminum radiators out there that appear to be the same, but when you start measuring fin counts, that's where you find the difference in everything. I've got some guys that run 3-blade, 4-blade, 6-blade, 2-blade, whatever they want to do it. But the thing is, with that regulator in it, what we've learned, I try not to run no more fan blade than we have to. We had some situations like late models can make it really tough with fan sizing, and CJ Jones and guys Jones Racing Products developed us a kind of an intermediate fan. It's an 18-inch fan, and it has a smaller center drive hub on it, so it gives us a longer blade. Well, that fan basically thinks it's a 19-inch blade due to the surface area is increased due to we decrease the center hub diameter. And those fans, what's unique about them, most of the time in the beginning of the year, we run 2 blades on them, and everybody's fine. And it'll maintain that with the regulator. Now, guys that are running just a number 16 top line, which if you don't run any type of water flow restrictor in them, I recommend a 16 line to let that be the restrictor to help it build water temperature and water pressure in these engines. That you usually end up having to put a little more fan blade on it to make that work when you don't run the restrictor. But with the arch system, due to the way the thermostat housing's designed, I recommend my customers run a 20 top hose on it because there's a restriction in that housing with it, and most of the time that thing will maintain with a 3-blade fan. It'll stay 185, 195 degrees when it's 90 degrees outside.
Yeah, honestly, it's rare to see a cooling issue with the 525s.
Right, yeah. Yeah. The biggest thing, we talked about the steam line kit in the beginning. There again, the coolant flow through the head gasket's restricted. So it's real easy, and that was done to build exhaust port temperature to help it pass federal emissions. GM isn't going to redesign a head gasket for the limited amount of engines that we do here. So the steam line kit's real critical. There's a lot of generic steam line kits on the market space. I mean, you type in LS steam line kits, and it's just page after page after page. But when we worked with Jones to do it, originally we were all on gas. So CJ, we designed a 4-port system, and it has a riser block that goes on top of the water pump, and everything is orifice sized, so it balanced the coolant flow through the engine. And then in turn, any air that's coming out gets dispersed into the radiator, then it can, evaporate itself out. There's some systems where they just run the front two lines and they tie it into the suction side of the water pump. And in my opinion, the air that's coming out of the top of that engine, you're just putting it right back in the system. And it never gives itself a chance to evacuate it out into the radiator because it's going right back in the suction side of the water pump. So there's a lot of different theories on it. I know what works for us, and I know all the effort that CJ put in. And I mean, we did water flow testing, and when I was at Robert's shop, we could, like oil systems, we always managed, gallons per minute flowing through the engine, and we know it takes, 7.2 gallons of oil flow through the engine at maximum RPM for it to survive in this environment. But we also did water flow testing, gallons per minute through the engine. And, a lot of people think that, okay, I bolted a water pump on the engine and the coolant flow is equal from the right side and the left side. Nowhere even close. On this LS engine, when you put a standard combination in it, the left side cylinder head always runs hotter than the right side. Number 3 cylinder is always the hottest running cylinder in these engines. And 9 times out of 10, when you knock a head gasket out of it from getting it over hot, it knocks the left side head gasket out of it. And that's due to the water flow through it. But with CJ and working with pump speeds and the pump design and then our steamline kit, it alleviates a lot of that problem, the way we operate it. And then when Art designed the thermostat deal and we plumb our steam lines into the thermostat housing, and I don't know if anyone's ever explained to you how this thing works, but people see conventional thermostats in engines. Well, the problem in a race engine, when you put a conventional thermostat in it, the pump's sitting there spinning. There's no really fluid flowing through the thermostat, so it sits there cavitating, and it just creates air in the system as it's sitting there turning. Well, the way Art designed this system is it has a bypass loop in it, so when you start the car up, it's immediately bypassing water out of the top back into the suction side of the pump. And then as the water temperature increases, there's a valve at the end of the thermostat that as the thermostat opens, it closes that port off, and then it flows conventionally through to the radiator. And that's what makes the thing so unique. And of course, our steam lines tie into the back, so it pushes the air right out into the radiator area, and then you can, relieve the system. So
It's honestly a must-have, in my opinion.
yeah, I mean, once I sit down and explain to my customer on the phone, he buys it. Now, the thing is, it is expensive. I mean, you're a $900 part on it. But like I tell people all the time, when I sit in these meetings, and there was, I think at Nick's seminar last year, a guy was in there and he says, well, that thing's so expensive. And I raised my hand and I said, hold on a second. I said, how many of you guys have left the board in front of the radiator when you went out on the racetrack? How much did that cost you to fix that problem? I said, so invested $900 in this out of the gate, and you can move it from engine to engine.
Yeah, you'll own it forever.
Yeah, it doesn't wear out. And the thermostats are readily available at the auto parts store if you needed to change one. I have a little tool kit that I take to the races that has a bunch of miscellaneous parts in it, and I keep them with me. And that system can be moved from engine to engine to engine. And they offer it for single bypass radiators and dual bypass radiators. And that's something else that we haven't really touched on a whole lot is the radiators on the engines. Years ago, everybody was getting to triple bypass radiators and things.
I could never make those work.
And the thing what a lot of people didn't understand is the more you change direction of flow of water through the radiator, it slows down, and now it doesn't have flow. And it's anytime you change the direction of something, it's generating temperature and resistance. So I recommend a dual bypass radiator on it. But if you have a single bypass radiator, that's fine. But we offer those thermostat housings with the outlet on the left side or the right side, so it'll accommodate any radiator application. And finally, after preaching about this thing for years now, I have super guys that call me, and I don't build super engines anymore. I do some 358 built engines for special customers that are, longtime customers of mine. But when they saw the technology on their 525s, they're like, why can't we do this on our super motors? And I'm, well, you can. So we have a package for it where it'll work on a super motor. Doesn't use a steam line kit, but it uses that same philosophy. Because you look at them super motor cars, they've all got the board in front of the radiator, and they're sitting there letting them run for 15 minutes before they get out to go on the racetrack. And, you got a 900 horsepower, $60,000 engine sitting there idling, trying to build temperature. Well, that little device right there will fix that whole problem. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Art had told me that there was one of he couldn't tell me who it was, but that just using the thermostat, they saved at least a barrel, if not 2 barrels of fuel in the season.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, yep, absolutely. I mean, most of the engines, when you're dealing with normal ambient temperatures, it's a 10-minute warm-up cycle, with a board in front of the radiator. And you put that system on it, and you cut that in half, And sometimes it takes longer depending on what ambient temperature is that you're running in. We had some strange circumstances at the end of the year. We had a race at Carolina Speedway with the Blue Ridge Outlaw late models at Thanksgiving, okay? And in the drag racing world that I came up in with running supercharged engines and stuff, you're constantly tuning the fuel curve of the engine with the atmosphere. And my entire life of traveling all over the country doing that stuff and successful with it, I had never raced in a condition where the corrected density altitude was more than 1,000 feet below sea level. I had one car out there that we actually put a 2-blade prop fan on it, but it had little blades on it that were 4 inches long because we couldn't keep temperature in it because he didn't have a thermostat regulator. And then tuning the carburetor. I mean, like Tony used to have a spec sheet, and is your baseline still the same for like 1,000 feet is what most of your stuff's tuned to? Yeah, so, and you go to the racetrack, and now all of a sudden you run the weather, and we need more fuel volume. And it's like now you have to start getting creative because we don't tune for that in this environment. So it gets a little creative, but there's a lot of apps that like helps me. There's a Race Air app on the phone, and because I have a lot of my customers that travel with tours, and Tyler Bear, soon they get to the racetrack, he'll call me and he said, okay, we got an hour before we go. Well, I'll get on my phone, and I might be at a Blue Ridge race at Cherokee Speedway, and I'll run the weather at his track, and then I'll text him what jets to put in it. And so he's good because he runs Nick's stuff on our 358 stuff that Tyler used to run, and then on the 525. So, but just the tuning side of it, and that's one thing with the 525. It gives you that option if you want to be a tuner. You can do that, and like Mike's program with Steve with their carburetors, and like Nick's out of the box, you bolt that thing on, and it's good. It might be not on the cliff, but it's good. It'll win races. It accelerates well. Everything's good. So in normal terms, through a normal race season, you really don't move jets around in these things on E85. They've got enough volume in them. The fuel curve's calibrated properly, so the atmospheric changes, it doesn't really affect it as much as people think it does. One thing we haven't touched on, spark plugs. There's all different gimmicks out there with spark plugs, spark plug wires. Put a set of wires on, get 30 horsepower. Yeah. People call me all the time. It's like, hey, these spark plug wires pick up 30 horsepower. And I said, well, let me tell you something. If it picked up 30 horsepower on that engine, you better work on what's bolted on top of the intake manifold because there's a problem there. But spark plug wires, heat ranges, the plugs that come in these things are hot. And I don't recommend running them in the heat range of them in a race application. We usually run a heat range or two colder. But there again, heat ranges you get with your fuel supplier, so you know the fuel, your engine builder, because there again, it's that recipe of spark, timing, fuel, carburetor venturi size, booster size. The tuning of the engine is where you see your performance in this thing.
Let's just take 1 or 2 more questions. We got another class.
Oh,
Tell them to get in the other room. We got 3 rooms. I'm long-winded. Yeah, no problem. Okay, and more questions, couple more questions.
We might be good then.
I think we've kind of looked at everything. The only thing we haven't talked really about is air filters. I'm huge on maintenance on my air filters and my customers. We've worked with several different manufacturers with developing filters. The stuff we worked on this past year. There again, I kind of look at simplicity with the racer because I've had racers call me. It's like, man, the motor just don't feel right. And I'm like, what'd you change? Well, nothing really. And I'm like, okay. I said, it was one customer that they were doing it all the time. Now they don't do it. I said, let me talk to Barry for a minute. So I talked to Barry and I said, so what'd you do this week? And he said, well, I just did no normal maintenance. And I'm like, okay. I said, you remember like 6 months ago when you got real heavy on the air filter oil? I said, did you have to do that again? And he's like, yeah, I might have done that. I'm like, get that off there. And the problem was they had over-oiled the air filter in it. and the thing was restricting the airflow through it. So Dave Hammond got with me, and we worked with a dry element filter, and that's what I'm promoting now moving forward. We did testing with Matt Long and Scott Shirey this year, and it's easier for you to maintain. You lightly blow it out with air, and then when you do have to wash it, it's just light Dawn dish soap, wash it, rinse it out good, and let it air dry. And this version that's on this engine is a 3-inch high version. And people say, well, the air filter's not tall enough. No. This engine at wide open throttle with a inch 345 entry carburetor will consume somewhere around 700 CFM of air. That air filter system right there will feed a 900 horsepower engine. So it's like I have customers that, there's none of them in here, have 13-year-old kids and late models that stand about this high. The first thing the kid says, I can't see the right front of the car because the air cleaner's in the way. So we just started trying to get things down because the norm was a 4-inch filter, and that was just kind of 4 or 5-inch filter. But we've learned to get things down, helps with visibility, and those filters. Hammond's deal, the way he designed it, is the top and the base actually snap onto the filter, so it's really airtight and it works really well for us. And his Sure Seal is O-ringed on the carburetor sealing flange and on the base to the Sure Seal. So. But that's it. I know you guys did a lot of air filter testing over at your facility.
We always doing that. We're testing everything we can, honestly.
Yeah. So, but if height-wise, have you guys found anything?
Alex runs a 3.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now the one thing I did see with Mike and Alex's carburetor or air filter inserts, that takes a whole different program for the air filter to make that thing work efficiently. So that stuff you'll have to talk with those guys about, because it is a little interesting looking at it, but it's going to take another thought process of how to get airflow into the carburetor efficiently. But those guys have tested it on their chassis dyno, and they have a program, I'm sure, that'll work for that.
Yep, absolutely.
And you can see that engine in the Crate Insider booth, and A&M is right across.
Yeah. Anything else? One more. Who wants to be the lucky last one? Come on. Mark Green, what do you got? There you go. I like to hear that. Nick, you got anything you want to add? Okay. The Altiers are new to 525 racing. So anything you need answered? Okay. All right.
And so if we're going to wrap up.
Yep.
Borrow a microphone here. I want to thank you guys all for being here. We actually do have another class that's going to come in here in just a few minutes. Obviously, we're going to turn over the room real quick. And it's a little controversial, but Buck Parker, he's in the NASA Technology Hall of Fame, and he has a tire treatment program, and this is not the tire treatments from the 80s. So if you have any curiosity, no matter how you emotionally feel about tire treatments, this will be a very, very interesting session to check out. So we invite you to come back. Thanks for stopping in.
Second. Yeah. Yes, thank all you guys for coming. Steve and I, and Nick and Kate and everybody in this side of the industry are very easy to get a hold of. And if you got any questions, we'll all feel free to answer them for you on the way home if you think of something. This engine will be back in the Jones Racing Products booth. If you got any questions, we can talk about it over there. There's tech manuals up here. Help yourself to them. And thank you guys for coming.